Hello and welcome into another edition of New Track Record Podcast from the WELT studios at the Allen County Public Library here in Fort Wayne. Caleb Hatch with you, Justin Kinney, joining us from an undisclosed location. Morning, Justin.
Good morning. I will fully disclose where I'm at. I'm at my house with a toddler, and hopefully we'll keep him entertained with Miss Rachel. We have construction going on out front of the house, so it's pretty chaotic here, but we're here to talk some IndyCar racing here as we get into November as the off-season slogs along.
Yeah, slog is the key word. Ironically, they're, I think, redoing the sidewalks in my neighborhood, so there's a truck and a bunch of workers with like buckets and machines all going, so totally understand that. So first off, happy Friday.
Yes, you too.
As we go through Friday, November 8th, and that actually really just means we're that much closer to the thermal test, which I think is going to be one of the highlights of this month, it seems, because there's not a whole lot of news trickling out, but we will make do with what we have so far coming in the last week. And I guess the big story, we finally have the full lineup confirmed for PREMA. I noticed they're saying PREMA, so I'm going to see if I'm going to switch to say PREMA. I think we've always said PREMA. But with Robert Shwartzman confirmed, look, this was long rumored. This was rumored going back to, August or September? But he's finally confirmed, and we finally have their full lineup for their first full year in IndyCar ready to go.
Yeah, it was something that we brought up in terms of the lack of an announcement for him, as could it be keeping the door open for somebody else, but it sounds like Shwartzman wanted to, the arrangement was to finish his season this year in, what is he doing, Endurance Cup, I think?
Yeah, he was in WEC.
Yeah, in WEC. So just wanted to complete that season before anything official was announced, and he will be in the seat with PREMA opposite of Callum Ilott. So it's a guy that has seen significant time in Formula 3, Formula 2, I want to say, as well. And even, did he do at least one FP1, I believe?
I believe so.
Formula 1.
Yeah, he's definitely done a lot in terms of being a reserve driver for a couple different years with Ferrari. You go back to 22, also 23 and 24. He's been a reserve driver. So Israeli-born, Russian-raised, but he's racing under the Israeli flag. I find all of that very interesting. But
yeah, interesting combination.
Yes, very interesting combo. But you look at his career. I mean, this is a guy who's very accomplished. He competed in Formula 3 a couple years. Won
Formula 3 in 2019.
Yes, finished third in 2018. In 2020, he was fourth in F2. Won 4 races there. In 2021, also with PREMA, he was second. Won 2 races that season in 2021, and then he's bounced around. He was a test driver in F1 and Formula E 22, 23. He did the World Challenge Europe Endurance Cup with AF Corsa the last couple years. Won a couple races there. Been a test driver for DS Penske for several years for Formula E. So really, this is about him getting significant seat time, because we're talking a handful of races in the GT World Challenge Series. 8 this year. There were 5 in 2023 that he competed in. So for him, this is really about getting consistent seat time. He's done what he can on the lower levels, if you will. He's had a lot of success. No one's doubting his level of success. Now you just wonder, as PREMA essentially found what Juncos found in a Callum Ilott, who will be Robert Schwartzman's teammate.
He will, and this is a guy that, as you mentioned, hasn't had much seat time in races, just 13 races since 2021, since he finished second in Formula 2. Had a couple FP1s in 2022 with Scuderia Ferrari. I think it was at the U.S. Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi, and then has just been a reserve driver for Ferrari the last couple years. So he's a dude that, like a lot of drivers, doesn't have a path to Formula One after going through the European ladder, F4, F3, F2, and just nothing has opened up for him in Formula One. So he's a guy that gave it a couple years, was hoping for an opportunity, didn't happen, and now at age 25 is coming over to the States to compete with PREMA, which he has been with at times in the ladder, and especially I think 2019 when he won the F3 championship was with PREMA. So, and then raced in F2 with PREMA. So I think it's a good hire for PREMA in terms of familiarity. There will be a learning curve for Robert Shwartzman. How significant, how steep that is remains to be seen. There's no doubt he has talent. But it's interesting that we're heading into a 2025 season for PREMA where we look at Callum Ilott as the veteran of a team.
Yeah, isn't that kind of hard to believe? I mean, he has, 2 full seasons in IndyCar, a handful of races last year with Aaron McLaren filling in. So he's experienced, he's talented. They go with 2 drivers that have raced for the team, right, in the past that they're familiar with. So it's going to be easy in terms of working with them and the communication. Yes, they have a lot to figure out on pit stops, on engineering, on race strategy, learning the tracks, all these things. But they're trying to build with people they know so that they're not starting from scratch in that aspect. And I think they have to be applauded for that because they're trying to make things as easy as they can for themselves. You have one experienced driver who's definitely talented. You have one who's going to come in as a rookie who's the team is familiar with. Obviously, we see his talent. We just don't know how that's going to translate to IndyCar just yet. He has tested, though, in IndyCar about a couple years ago with Ganassi. That test went well. So he does have seat time. It's not much, but he has seat time. And I guess the next thing is, when will be his first test with PREMA? When are those things going to come about, and how will he fare there?
Have we got any confirmation that PREMA will be at Thermal later this month?
I have not seen anything as far as them being at Thermal.
Do you feel, now Robert Shwartzman coming in, yeah, he's going to be a rookie at IndyCar, not a rookie to PREMA. Callum Ilott, as we mentioned, a couple years experience. Would you have liked to see PREMA go with a more veteran driver to be the leader of this team, or are you looking at both these drivers having significant time with PREMA in the past as an advantage, as they're going to be fighting uphill at every stop on the calendar, and now you have the charter system. I mean, PREMA's going to be up against it. We know they're fully committed, but would you have liked to see a more veteran driver in one of those seats?
I think I like what they did because they have a driver with a couple years of IndyCar experience who's very well thought of. So they've checked that box with Callum Ilott. Also, he raced with PREMA before. You got to go way back. It looks like his stint was in 2017. He did F3 with them, and then also did the Macau Grand Prix with them. But I like that they kind of eliminated that, new driver to a new team thing because they've worked together in the past. So they understand, the drivers understand, and the team understands how each other works. So there's not going to be an adjustment period. So they can get to test days and just get right to work on checking out boxes on race weekends. It's the same thing. I think that's going to lower their learning curve a bit, and I like what they did. Look, Schwartzman's talented. We've seen several talented drivers come in out of F2 the last couple of years. Obviously, Christian Lundgaard, Marcus Armstrong. So I don't think he's going to be out of his depth in an IndyCar. I don't think anyone's concerned with that. It's just a matter of, can he get consistent results? Can he finish races and get laps and get experience so he can build for year 2? That's really the question for me. And so I like what they've done with this lineup. I think a lot of people, us included, maybe expected a Logan Sargent to be a possibility. Now he's testing at Thermal later this month as well with Meyer Shank Racing, so he is one of those people getting that Thermal test. But I like what they've done. I guess you could have gone with Sargent, but they went with another guy they're familiar with, and who knows, maybe Sargent is lining something else up behind the scenes.
Yeah, could he be on the radar of Hunkos Hollinger, for example, at this point? And I agree with you, and I think it shows, too, with PREMA is they know that it's going to take a while for them, and I think they've put 2 drivers in position that we know are talented. Ilott has proved it at times, but I think consistency is key. The reality of expectations is key. All indications are that PREMA knows it's going to take a couple years to maybe even reach the midfield of IndyCar, but it has 2 drivers that I feel they are confident in that will hit their stride over multiple seasons. And I think that's a great sign. I think maybe sometimes when a new team or any team kind of brings in a veteran driver, you expect results out of the gate with a new team. And I feel like PREMA is realistic in the fact that, hey, we have two young, very talented drivers. We're all going to be learning along the way, and results are going to come. It may not be year one, but year two and beyond. So I really like this lineup. It'll go through its teething troubles as the team at large as well. But I think there's promise here, definitely.
So we talked about the thermal test. And one other note, Shwartzman does have an IndyCar test. Logan Sargent doesn't. Logan Sargent had that seat fitting a couple years ago with Foyt, and then he got the Williams driver development program and then continued on in the F1 ladder before eventually getting to Williams and F1. So that is an advantage that Shwartzman has over Logan Sargent. But we talk about that thermal test because we mentioned several things about that already so far. And we already know it'll be Logan Sargent with Meyershank Racing. Arrow McLaren's going to test Enzo Fittipaldi. Now, again, he's not going to be racing for Arrow McLaren, but he did a test, last offseason with Dale Coyne Racing. So they're kind of going through, checking the boxes, and this is an opportunity again, November 19th. That's that magical date where we expect to get maybe some movement after that. Felipe Nasr also testing for Penske. Now, he is running IndyCar, did the preseason test at COTA in 2020. He was fastest in that session. That was a very rainy session, as we recall, and also did another test for Team Penske in 2023 at Sebring. And he's also the IMSA GTP champion with Porsche Penske Motorsports. So he's doing the test with Penske, kind of a favor. This is a guy who's very talented, obviously raced in F1 as well. So, and also Louis Foster expected to join on that test at Thermal with Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. So we have a lot really kind of looking ahead in terms of this test. Plus, Hunnell McElrea, he will also be there as well. So it's a pretty full schedule, but he will be there with Ed Carpenter Racing. Again, ECR is full, but he's getting an opportunity to try to kind of show what he can do, and he was impressive in limited seat time this year. So again, another driver not in contention with that team, but in contention for other teams. This just seems to be an evaluation that benefits everyone. Drivers getting seat time, and the teams also getting seat time at the thermal track, where it's obviously been limited.
Yeah, and you kind of look at it and you wonder, some people will be like, well, why are they testing for teams that they obviously have no chance to test with? But it's all about the future for some of these teams. Who's to say that a position spot may not open up in a couple years, and maybe let's take Felipe Nasr, for example, if he's racing for a Coyne or a Hollinger, and a team that tested him a couple years ago is interested in him, then they have that background, and just even you can learn not necessarily on track results, but how he meshes with the team, how he is over the radio, personality, obviously. All those things can matter, maybe not in the near term, but in the long term.
And then also not to forget the other Fittipaldi, Pietro Fittipaldi. Marshall Pruitt, Racer.com, had a write-up as well talking about the Fittipaldi brothers. They both want to be in IndyCar. And remember, it seemed like Enzo, there was a shot at him being in IndyCar last offseason going into this past season. Obviously didn't work out. He went back to Europe. But Pietro Fittipaldi, he's trying to stay with Rahal. That's his first option. They're trying to continue on with that sponsorship deal with 5 Hour Energy that was really just starting off as a two-race thing with the Indy GP and the Indy 500, or was it Indy 500 in Detroit? I forget which one, but then they added Road America. They added several other races throughout the year. So that relationship grew as the season went on, and they seemed to like him, and he seemed to do fairly well with that sponsor as the primary sponsor on the car, throw in another wrench. So we'd heard a lot about Devlin DeFrancesco and his father trying to essentially buy a stake in the Juncos Hollinger team, and that was kind of one of the hot rumors as the season wound to a close. Well, now Marshall Pruitt adds that DeFrancesco is set to step into Rahal's third and final seat. So that's the rumor there. So he would fill out their lineup, so that would leave Coyne with 2 seats, Juncos Hollinger with 2 seats, and then obviously some part-time entries for the Indy 500.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, when you can't get a spot somewhere else, you just buy yourself into a team. You know, the wonders of being able to do that. You mentioned Enzo Fittipaldi and his chances of getting into IndyCars. The guy that's still only 23 years old and has been in Formula 2 for 4 years. You mentioned he had that couple starts in the Indy Pro 2000 in 2021, but he's finishing his 4th season in Formula 2 this year, and that season's still going on. He's 12th currently in the points, has a win, also had a win last year in Formula 2, and he finished 7th. That's his highest season finish in that series. So another driver that's up against it, no real path to Formula 1. Maybe hasn't captured the interest of certain Formula 1 teams, but this is another guy that raced for PREMA, that won the Italian F4 championship way back in 2018 with PREMA. So could this be a driver that PREMA could have on its short list in future years? Who knows, as a guy that's still just 23 years old.
And a guy who's, I mean, he's had success in F2. I mean, he's done several seasons of F2, 21 through this past year, won a couple races, had several fastest laps, several podiums. So, I mean, he's a talented driver, best finish of 7th in 2023 in that series. So he's knocking on the door, just can't get a seat, like you said. And who knows, maybe we have a brothers Fittipaldi team in IndyCar, maybe at Coyne or Juncos next season. I wouldn't say it's completely out of the realm of possibility, because they've done a good job, and as they pointed out, as Pietro pointed out in his quotes with Marshall Pruitt on Racer.com, you know, people have this perception that, oh, Emerson's just paying for the racing careers, and that's simply not the case. But they've done a good job with social media and having their video channel of kind of growing an audience, growing a fan base, and maybe that's something that can help push them over the edge, along with the fact that, well, they do have a famous last name, and that does mean something in racing after all.
Yeah, that definitely helps. And you wonder, with no full-time Brazilian driver set to be on the grid next year, and you look at Juncos Hollinger, and yeah, they're Argentinian base. You know, do they expand and kind of become a South America type team? Do they look at it and say, hey, you know, let's bring on one Brazilian, let's bring on two Brazilians, let's bring two Brazilians with the same last name on board and branch off into, could they bring in some Brazilian sponsors and stuff like that, and really kind of be a South American based team, as opposed to just focusing and really being identified as an Argentinian team? You kind of wonder it as Juncos Hollinger continues to look for support and sponsorship, if that's a potential path.
Now, at this rate, I feel like we're not going to see the same driver lineup that ended the season for Juncos Hollinger be there at St. Pete in March of 2025. I'd be very surprised if both Romain Grosjean and Connor Daly are with that team at St. Pete next year.
Let's talk about Romain Grosjean for a second, because it's been very, very quiet both on his front and Juncos' front, at least through the first couple months of the off season. What do you expect? Do we see him on the grid full time in 2025?
Grosjean, no, I really don't. And I think I saw something the other day about his seat in sports cars, that coming to a close. So I don't know. I'd be very surprised to see him in IndyCar. It kind of just comes down to, does he want to stay in IndyCar? If he does, he will. If he doesn't, I think he'll move on to something else.
Yeah, I think, have we seen the last of Grosjean in IndyCar? Potentially. I haven't really seen any interviews or anything with him in terms of what his opinion is on the situation, what his prospects are. So we'll have to wait and see. But it's been interesting for a guy that is as really a dude that commands a lot of attention on track and in the media and in the fan base, polarizing guy. I haven't really heard too much about his prospects for 2025, and I can't imagine that's a good thing for him and those that are Romain Grosjean fans.
Yes, so That's the other thing to really keep an eye on. But I'll be very curious to see what happens at this thermal test, how this shakes out. Obviously, a lot of drivers who are going to be testing, but not with the team they're going to be competing with if they get a seat, but just what happens and how this shakes out. And, as the offseason goes on, who do we see at Juncos Hollinger in a test? That we're not really seeing that. They're still trying to put things together. So I'll be very curious what happens with all of this. And, November 19th, we've been basically pointing the calendar to that for some time. Hey, maybe we'll have answers after November 19th, and that seems to be what we're just going to hold our hopes on so far.
Apparently, and are we confirmed with Juncos to bring back both cars, too? I mean, has that been confirmed with the 77 and the 78?
I think so. I don't think there's been any change. I mean, because they have the charters, so why would they not bring back both cars?
True. Yeah, that's true. I always forget about those pesky charters.
And then some other driver news. So Marco Andretti, all but confirming he'll be with Andretti, or at least with the team. Didn't say Andretti, but with the team for the 2025 Indy 500. I'd be surprised if it's anyone else. Friend of the podcast, Hickey93, asking Marco, when Marco ran a Q&A on Twitter the other day, will you be running in the 2025 Indy 500 and a smiley face emoji? So I would say that's all but confirmation that we need for that. And then also Millivet and Terry Motorsports, they'll be back with Jack Miller in the series formerly known as Indy Lights. Also for that series, we will have Juncos. Speaking of Juncos, talked about them. Miguelma Garcia will be with them in that series. And that is, it's an interesting hire. Don't really know much about him in terms of what his career has been, but we'll find out. He's a Paraguayan driver who's kind of moving over. It's a big change. He'll be in the full season number 75 entry with that team, competed in the 2023 Italian GT Championship with a Lamborghini-backed team, 2 podium finishes in his debut year for GT3 Racing. He competed in the Paraguay National Rally Championship in 2021. In 2022, TC 2000, Super TC 2000 Touring Car Championships, 1 pole, 4 podiums, which I believe one of those is a series that Agustin Canapino is back competing in. So kind of a relatively unknown guy, and it will be fascinating to see how he develops and what he does. Obviously missing that Chris Griffiths Memorial Test a couple weeks ago, so kind of already a bit behind.
But another seemingly talented driver that's coming over that will compete full-time in that series and add to the depth of that talent.
Yes. So that's a look at what's happening in terms of drivers in the series and kind of the latest silly season stuff. So really it comes down to the thermal test and then these remaining seats that we have left. 2 at Juncos, 1 at Rahal, 2 at Dale Coyne Racing, and then the part-time Indy 500 entries that are still out there as well. But to be closing in on Thanksgiving here in the U.S. and just have a handful of seats, they really filled things up here quickly in the offseason, and it's gone quiet, which means those teams are assessing budgets and looking at what's available, what's out there to make sure they get the best deal and best fit for them possible before the season starts.
And looking at those drivers that bring budget, especially the ones that bring a significant amount of money, and the fact that they're probably on the short list of these remaining seats because of the financials that they're able to bring to the table.
So let's run through all the drivers. So we know Enzo Fittipaldi, Pietro Fittipaldi, Logan Sargent, Romain Grosjean, Connor Daly. Let's see, who else? Devlin DeFrancesco on the radar, Hunter McElroy on the radar, Jacob Abel, who we've not talked about. Does he land at least a part-time entry? Catherine Legge, Jamie Chadwick as well. Any other drivers that are kind of on that radar you feel like we're missing here?
I don't think so. I think I'm trying to rack my brain on guys that were in seats last year.
I guess Toby Sowery. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, guys like that. So, but yeah, that's just the ones that have raced in IndyCar in the past, or at least we've known that have been interested in IndyCar in the past. Who else kind of comes out of the woodwork? Are there more names behind the scenes that we haven't heard of?
Jack Harvey, one other name, obviously on the radar after he competed most of last season with Dale Coyne Racing as well. So that's a look at the names. And again, they're all competing for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, full-time seats. So it's going to be tough.
Very much so, going to be tough. And especially with the new rule, the Dale Coyne rule, where you can't have more than 3 drivers in a car for an entire season.
Yes, that will be fascinating to watch if Coyne does do a split and how that works for their lineup in 2025. Well, if you agree or disagree with us, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can always find us on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, CastBox, Player FM, YouTube Music, wherever you find your podcasts. Download and listen for free. You can also find us on social media, IndyCar Podcast on Twitter/X, also on Facebook. Just search for New Track Record. And on Instagram, we are IndyCar Podcast as well. Send us an email if you have questions, comments, rants, what have you. Let us know, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. And we're still updating the website, so I hope to have that for you here as soon as possible. But newtrackrecordpodcast.com once it's back up, and you can sign up for emails to get notifications of new episodes and whatnot on there as well once we're back up and running. And as always, thanks for our supporters on Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. Thanks to Xavier and others for their support. And don't forget, you can download and listen to the podcast for free on your favorite podcasting platform. Okay, abbreviated mailbag this week. Really abbreviated episode this week, just because it's been a surprisingly quiet week when we look at how things have gone. So Taylor Swift was in Indy last weekend to wrap up her Eras Tour. Obviously a very big deal. And someone had posted, and I don't think anything happened, but it kind of became people guessing and making fun of this. But someone had posted, according to a reliable insider, Taylor Swift will reportedly make an important announcement at her Eras Tour show in Indianapolis. And I joked, Taylor Swift to McLaren? And we had a few replies. Lynn_IndyCar said she's going to renew her sponsorship on the CGR 10 car. That's right, because remember with the 1989 World Tour, she sponsored Tony Kanaan's car back in 2014 at Detroit. So there is an IndyCar connection there. And that was back, though, when she was with Scott Borchetta. She's no longer with Scott Borchetta, so would not expect to see her on an IndyCar again in that capacity. Poet Shevchenko said Swift to Dale Coyne in a partial season. Historic Hot Lap said just for Formula One FP1. And then Bauer Racing said even she would probably get fired within the week.
Yeah, I was going to say, wouldn't it be more accurate for McLaren to say that she had been fired by McLaren? It seems to happen more often than hirings.
And then we have this on Tom Cruise eyeing Days of Thunder sequel for Paramount. That from Adam Stern. And I said, time for Driven 2, Too Driven to Drive. Kind of throwing in a Fast and Furious joke in there. But Lynn_IndyCar said, give me sequel to Rain Man first or another Top Gun for either race movie. I mean, we got another Top Gun. So, I mean, I'm sure they'll find a way to make a third eventually. And Historic Hot Lap said, I've been watching Tulsa King. I think Sylvester Stallone can get us another Driven. Let's go. Have you watched Tulsa King? I have not. I've seen ads for it.
I have not. I've heard good things, but I've not watched it.
I have not watched it either. So, and then this other note on the mailbag, this from Xander_Ridge. For fun, make your own Indy teams. What engine would you go with? You can bring in a new manufacturer if you want, but explain why. Who are your drivers? Pick 3, one from the current grid, one from lights, one free choice. And what sponsors will influence your liveries for each car? So, let's play this little game. What engine would you go with?
Chevy.
As would I.
Yeah, that was easy.
Okay. Who are your drivers? Pick 3.
Next? So I have one current, one from lights.
And one freebie.
One freebie. Okay. So, well, I'm going Alex Palou for my current driver. Are we going lights from last year? I think that's the easiest. I'll go Louis Foster as the champion. And then I have a freebie. So anybody else that I want? I will go, let's see, who do I want?
And it could be any series, obviously.
McLaughlin.
Okay.
What's that?
It could be any series. I think it's just a free choice. So
yeah, I was looking around, and I was like, whatever, I'm sticking with IndyCar. So I'm going to Scott McLaughlin. That's my 3. And then what was my liveries?
Yeah, what sponsors?
Well, I'm always, as you know, a big fan of Big Tobacco.
I knew you'd go there. Team Cool Green?
Splash Marlboro all over those.
Marlboro? Okay.
Yeah.
So we both went with Chevy. One from the current grid, so I'm going to go with, you know what, give me Colton Herta. And then one from NXT, so give me Jacob Abel, because I think he should move up and be pretty good. And then the free choice, give me Pato O'Ward. So give me the two young guns, Chevy, and then what sponsors influence? Man, I'm trying to think of like a car. Give me Red Bull. The Red Bull Team Cheever cars, I love those back in the day. Give me Red Bull. That's what I would want.
Seriously. And even nowadays in Formula One, I love those liveries.
Yes. So I would be all about that. All right, well, that wraps up a very abbreviated mailbag. Again, telling you we're rolling through things this week. Now we get to news and notes. And the first thing notable, 5 years ago this week, Roger Penske took over the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Well, at least the announcement was made. Obviously, that didn't happen until the following January. But the announcement, Penske taking over IndyCar, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, also IMS Productions, happened 5 years ago this week. Isn't that hard to believe?
Okay, so it is. Now, if we take this opportunity to say one positive over the last 5 years and one negative over the last 5 years, I will let you go first.
Positive, IndyCar is the best TV deal they've ever had with this new Fox deal, and have had continued growth in the TV department in terms of increasing ratings. Didn't get data from this year, obviously, but before that, and also just more and more races on network. And now they have an all-network TV deal with all cable for practice and qualifying. So the streaming element, which Venue Sports embroiled in lawsuits and stuff, not going to be a major factor. And I know people are upset about that, but you're going to get the maximum eyes on product possible for races. So the TV deal is a massive, massive win, and I don't think we can ever understate that.
Definitely huge. What's your negative?
Oof. Negative is that we're still running the same car, and in conjunction with that, Honda's was threatening to leave at one point. I don't know if they're going to leave. It seems to have gone quiet, but the same car, and it really it's a trifecta. It's the same car with the same two manufacturers, and Honda potentially could leave.
Correct. Yes. I'll try to mix it up a little bit, at least with my positive. I will say grid counts.
Yes.
We've talked what's too much, but who would have thought even a handful of years ago we'd be talking about having too many cars on the grid, especially when it's always talked about how expensive it is to field cars and how it's upwards of $10 million a year for a quality entry, yet we have 27 full-time cars that are set to be on the grid. I always kind of scoff it. I know it's expensive, but it can't be that debilitating because we have 27 cars on the grid. So that's something I point to as a positive in terms of what we've seen. And then a negative, you took my stale car and stale entries. I will say the lack of growth with the schedule. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a budgetary thing that we aren't at 20. It's also an interest thing. But I would have expected more in terms of marquee events or new locales over the last 5 years than what we've gotten. Well, I mean, I guess we can count Arlington, but it hasn't really happened yet. So that's nice. We had a couple fun years at Nashville. Seems to be going to be at the Speedway now, the Oval. But I will say just kind of expected more in terms of overall just risks taken. Maybe that's a good answer for a negative. Is I expected more risks that could really pay off or could crash and burn just because Roger Penske just has all the money in the world. But, it's his money, not my money. I don't get to control how he spends it. So I'll go 5 years with Roger Penske.
You look at what they've added for this year and just in those last handful of years. Thermal Club, obviously new. They moved from Detroit at Belle Isle to downtown Detroit streets. Iowa left and came back, which that I feel like was more pandemic related at the time. Laguna Seca was already back in motion, Portland already back in motion, Milwaukee back, and then Nashville. So a year from now, when they have the Arlington race set to be on the schedule, hopefully a Mexico race as well, maybe another, I think we'd have a different answer. But as of right now, yes, the schedule has had a few tweaks, but the groundbreaking events, you had Nashville on the streets, and then it was supposed to be down Broadway, and then that didn't work out. Milwaukee back, that was a success in year one. Obviously, Iowa, the rebirth of that, but that happened over the Penske regime because they're already racing at Iowa, and then Thermal is a big TBD. So, yeah, I guess one other positive, obviously the health of the Indy 500's the strongest it's been since pre-split. That's another positive as well. And this is a good topic discussion for the off season as well, so we can maybe go more in depth. If it's another quiet news week, we can go more in depth on this topic next week. Elsewhere,
I think too is, when you look at the schedule, I guess we're adding events, but we're not adding more races because I expect the doubleheader at Milwaukee to go away.
Yeah, and it is.
And eventually Iowa going to one race. Hopefully we keep one race there. I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of years to see Portland go away. All indications are it's just not very exciting. Paddock doesn't really like going there. There's no energy. And then would they eventually get rid of the GP if they could have enough races? So I think we're going to see more events added, more races added, but also some subtractions as well. I still look at that 20 number as the perfect number, but I don't want 20 races with 4 doubleheaders.
Correct. And I think, the teams already feel maxed out as it is in terms of, 17, 18 events, but with this new TV package, you should automatically get better numbers unless you have, multiple races moved to FS1 or FS2 due to rain or extenuating circumstances. So you should be better off in that aspect, and that should help sell more sponsors and therefore make the teams be able to afford, but also cutting costs. How can IndyCar help in cutting the costs for the teams to make it better to grow not only the grid, because I don't think the grid really needs a lot of growth, but really to grow more events for the series. Elsewhere,
you need to, if to getting to 20, you need to make it more cost prohibitive for the teams. You can't just say, hey, we're adding 3 more races, deal with it, because like you said, these teams, a lot of them are already maxed out in terms of what they can do.
Elsewhere, Chip Ganassi Racing, they've launched a new driver development service. First 2 clients, Kiwu Motorsport, they compete in the Formula Regional America Series, and Palou Motorsport, Euro Cup 3 team, of course, started by Alex Palou. So Marshall Pruitt with the write-up there on Racer.com. So they're just trying to find ways to utilize those 2 extra car entries that went away because of the charters from IndyCar and just make use of their staffing, and there's another element to that.
Right, and I feel like eventually maybe Ganassi doesn't get directly involved in the lower rungs, US Pro 2000, Indy Pro 2000, whatever the heck they're calling it, USF Juniors, but maybe partnering with teams in those series as part of this development program.
The Taylor Swift Eras Tour, we talked about this. IndyCar had a good presence. They had an Eras Tour themed IndyCar Series car that was mocked up, looked pretty cool with that. And then this note from Adam Stern in the Sports Business Journal, the Taylor Swift promotion announcement post last week by IMS, more engagement than almost all the racetrack's social media messages this year, even topping its announcement in May that the Indy 500 was being delayed by poor weather. That is insane.
Taylor Swift factor. Where did they put that car? Was it at Lucas Oil? Was it at the airport?
That is a good question.
I saw a picture of it. I just didn't know where it was.
Yes, I don't know. That is a good question.
Come on, the old standby of, driving up in an Indy car, you couldn't get Taylor Swift in a 2-seater?
I think you're asking for a lot there. I think it's pretty cool.
I know. I was just, it's probably a little bit difficult to get that to happen.
Let's see if I can actually...
in Indianapolis if she's going through the streets.
find where this Taylor Swift theme. So this was a post that they just had at IMS, but then they also had 11 special racing helmets as well in a collaboration with Bell Helmets, who is one of the premier helmet brands. So they had that livery. It was placed near the concert venue during the show, so that's smart. And then they had each helmet design specific to one of Taylor's albums. So fans would be able to recognize everything. So the helmets were placed around downtown Indy, and then the helmets were on display. They had a map pointing out locations. So basically this was kind of like the treasure hunt promotions that they do, kind of the same tactic. And then each location has a QR code, direct fans to match each helmet with influential women in motorsports. This is a genius thing that they did. And then the helmet's going to be auctioned off, proceeds benefiting women in motorsports North America. So all in all, just a genius promotion. And speaking of genius promotions, an IndyCar sponsor, ELF Cosmetics, they had the lip oil change reimagined, that same thing that they did for the Indy 500. They had a free pop-up on the second floor at Circle Center Mall over the weekend of the concerts. So they also had a partnership with STEM at Purdue. They had Catherine Legg's IndyCar on display. So again, another very smart thing that they did for that weekend. But it's crazy. People, love her or hate her with Taylor Swift, but man, that is a way to get attention on your product, and very smart promotion by IMS and IndyCar.
Very much so. And I don't understand anybody that doesn't like Taylor Swift. I mean, she's ultra popular, and she does a lot with nonprofits and donations and stuff. And I think she's a tremendous talent, and she was very much welcome in Indianapolis. What did you do? 2 shows?
3
last weekend. 3.
Yes.
And I didn't know that was the end of her tour. She was culminating her tour in Indianapolis. Huh?
Yes, very big deal at Lucas Oil Stadium. And then one other note, speaking of female sponsorships, female drivers, Hailie Deegan. So she competed in the Formula Regional Americas as well. And so she's just trying to get more seat time in that series. And we talked about this, with her moving to Indy Lights. And so I think for them and for her, it's just getting more and more seat time at COTA. And so she had a pretty solid weekend, was improving as things went on. And taking a look at, I'm trying to find the results here. I had them, and then let's see, where would this be? COTA. There we go. Race 1 official results. She finished in 11th out of 15 drivers. Not bad. And then in race 2, the key thing is she's finishing, right? And then race 2, she finished 10th.
That experience.
She finished 10th out of 15. So she's moving up and doing a solid job. And again, these are the kind of things that are going to help her with her experience. And I think she's showing pretty well. In fact, was really quick in practice, had a top 5 practice time, and in qualifying as well, was 11th for qualifying. So kind of moved up in one of the races as well. So a good opportunity for her to kind of build and grow in that series.
Very much so. And people need to remember she's completely foreign to these open-wheel cars. So any experience she can get is going to be huge. It's going to be a learning experience for her in 2025, but she is really talented, has support, and we should be patient with her, and hopefully it works out.
And then one final note. Actually, no, that was it. So we're on to Random Split Era Driver of the Week.
How about that? We're going to the final season of the Champ Car World Series. That is 2007, 14 races. If I am correct, you attended all 14 of these races.
I did not.
At such exotic locales as, and we've talked about this before, like as much as people dog the late Champ Car seasons, it's full of races that people either want to see back on the schedule or are back on the schedule. I'm talking about like Road America that was on the 2007 schedule. but Cleveland, Edmonton, Mexico City. I mean,
Surfers Paradise.
I mean, exactly.
Vegas.
We dogged some of these seasons, but I forgot they went to Assen, the TT circuit in Assen in the Netherlands. And Belgium. They raced in Belgium, too. This is wild. So, anyway, fertile ground for random split era drivers of the week, and we're going with Neil Yanni.
Ah, yes. I have heard of him.
Neil Yanni, a native of Switzerland, is raced that season in the Champ Car World Series and actually has been around for a significant amount of time. He's a guy that's done Le Mans. He's done a lot of endurance racing, and even this year racing in endurance in the hypercar category, and did an IMSA race as well. So way back in 2007, Neil Yanni did 14 races, all 14 that season. They were supposed to be 17 races, ended up being 14 races. Finished on the podium 3 different times in that season. When you look at his results from that year, I thought he found his results, but it was actually the Indian Racing League.
I have his results right here. So he was top 10 in every race except for Houston and Portland. Best finishes: second at Toronto, second at San Jose, was third at Cleveland, 9th in the championship.
There
so
it is.
He was very impressive.
PKV racing,
which is what, Patrick Kalkoven Vassar, right?
It was Craig Pollock who was part
that's
of Pac
right.
West.
That's right. Pollock, Kalkoven Vassar.
Yes. So that was his one season. I actually finished 9th that season in points. Did some A1 Grand Prix in Switzerland for several years in the mid-2000s. That was really it. Did Formula Renault for several years before his chance. Was a test driver for both Sauber and Red Bull and Toro Rosso in the mid-2000s as well. So this guy got around. Has plenty of results in the 24-hour Le Mans, won it in 2016 with Porsche, and is still doing the 24-hour of Le Mans. And last year was a teammate of random, how would we call this? A random reunification driver of the week, Renee Binder.
Oh, hey, there you go.
How about that? So still a guy that's out and driving. He did that 1 year again with PKV Racing, and he chose to then focus on the 2007-2008 A1 GP season rather than stay in Champ Car for 2008, which was good because the series was absorbed by the Indy Racing League. So that is it for him. Still just 40 years old. A native of Switzerland, still active, particularly in endurance racing and sports car racing. It's Neil Yanni, this week's Random Split Era Driver of the Week.
And his teammates with PKV Racing in 2007, Tristan Gomedy, I hope I said that right, Mario Dominguez did 1 race in the 22, and then Oriol Surya did 2 races in the 22. So a couple other Random Split Era Drivers of the Week as well, factoring in his teammates with PKV. So you talked, there were 3 circuits that did not happen on the schedule. So Denver canceled by Champ Car, Grand Prix of Denver, February 1st. Chinese Champ Car Grand Prix was canceled after the FIA rejected Champ Car's replacement date. That was canceled on April 2nd. And the Grand Prix of Arizona canceled on August 29th. Now, this would have been a temporary street circuit through downtown Phoenix. Obviously did not happen. So there was...
They actually had a deal for a 5-year deal for that race, and it never happened once. Like, they didn't have enough financials to even have it 1 year. So we kind of, scoff at races like Baltimore, that were good races, but ran out of money and were financial losers. Like the Grand Prix of Arizona was never run, ever.
And then you have the Grand Prix of Denver, which is a hot rumor to return to IndyCar in the future. That was run in CART 90, 91. and then 2002 through 2006 as well. And then maybe that returns on the schedule, but I just find it fascinating the races on there. And you look at what was absorbed from that schedule. Remember 2007 and 2008, you had Long Beach obviously absorbed. They still race there. Portland was not absorbed. You had Toronto absorbed. You had Edmonton absorbed. Road America was not absorbed. And then Surfers was absorbed but as a one-off exhibition event, and that was it. So there really wasn't a whole lot of carryover. When you look at the schedule, yes, there are races their IndyCars returned to since, but you had Toronto, you had Edmonton, and you had Long Beach. And that was it. Oh, and Surfers. And Surfers.
First race of the season in the streets of Vegas.
Yes, which that event did not go well.
It wasn't great, but yeah, it was in the streets of Vegas now, of course, owned by Formula One.
All right, and this just in, HMD Motorsports saying stay tuned for some more news next week. So probably some more driver announcements with that team. I think they have, only 6 entries, so they're due to add another, 3, 4, 5 cars.
Yeah, they are very much due for some more announcements. So, yeah, if anything, maybe we'll have some lights driver announcements, maybe for lucky a couple IndyCar announcements as well. But we found a way to fill this week. We'll tackle next week a week from now.
All right, anything that we missed?
I don't think so. It was one of those weeks in the off season where you're hoping for something, and outside of the Robert Shwartzman news, we were really void of much of anything in terms of IndyCar this week. But we slogged our way through. Yes,
there's something I actually just thought of. Marshall Pruitt in the Racer.com mailbag, basically saying IndyCar season finale is going to be held on the Oval in Nashville, which we know for the foreseeable future. If the return in next year is just as good or better than this year, he says he thinks talks of returning to the streets will be forgotten. And the drivers seem to like the Oval. And then I found this interesting. In terms of race events that drivers like and dislike, I find it fascinating that he had this note tucked into it. The biggest dog on the calendar in terms of audience size is either Laguna or the Indy GP. And all I hear from the paddock each year is how much they hate Portland. So my guess is one of the West Coast stops would be trimmed if a sacrifice was required. I mentioned Gateway's shrinking audience isn't great. IndyCar not looking to shed any ovals. So it really comes down to, you want to have good crowds. Portland, obviously, the crowd did not look good this past year. I think them getting Formula E really hurt the IndyCar crowd. And we'll see if that what impact that has this year as well.
Yeah, everybody talking about when we didn't have Portland, you got to get in the Pacific Northwest. IndyCar has, and the response has been pretty tepid at best.
Yes, so they need something to inject new life in that event, and hopefully. The other thing I noticed
about doing a streets of Portland, I don't know.
That could be interesting. I mean, when you have the circuit right there, though, it's kind of silly to go to all the cost. But does IndyCar partner with Formula E on the same weekend? I'm just trying to spitball things here to help that event, and I think the racing it's been hit or miss at Portland, but I just think they need something to inject new life there. The one thing I did notice with Formula E, the track facility and everything just looks so much nicer and more cleaned up and put together with more banners compared to IndyCar. So I don't know. I mean, I get that a lot of that's on the promoter, but is that
Correct.
A factor
or even
as
a
well?
Series. Like if it's Formula E, is the FIA funding that race and promoting it? I don't really know.
All right, well, that does it for us. Don't forget, if you missed our interview with Art Garner talking about the new book on A.J. Foyt, Survivor Champion Legend, you can catch up on last week's episode as well. For Justin Kinney, I am Caleb Hatch. We'll be back next week with the latest news, notes, and rumors in IndyCar here on New Track Record Podcast.